In today's video, I want to reflect upon this quote here from the Kybalion. Everything is and isn't at the same time. Now, one of the things that I always encourage throughout these videos, I encourage within myself, and I believe it's very beneficial to integrate into your day-to-day life, is fluidity of mind. Now, this conversation was also stimulated by an article that I was reading prior, and I want to link to it. It's from Clinical Psychological Science. And they did some research. They studied words, absolutist perspectives, saying one way is better than the other, this way or no way, this way or that way, were specific indicators for anxiety and depression. See, on the journey to realizing our vision, we realize that we can encounter many different information pieces, conversations with people, environments, and so forth. And what we want to do is allow ourselves from within to align with the true and accurate meaning, one that feels resonant, that brings forth inner peace, love, harmony. This allows for lateral thinking, as we discussed in last week's video, which I brought up Shiva Shakti. And we looked at divergent thinking and convergent thinking, and how anandamide, the bliss molecule, has a contributing role to bring forth lateral thinking, which is the harmonizing of divergent and convergent perspectives. Now, it all starts in mind, and so what we want to do is we want to encourage certain kinds of thinking patterns. And I trust that the more you work with this information, the more you're going to love this saying here, as I have personally, over the years, fallen deeper in love with this saying. Everything is and isn't at the same time. See, there are many ways of looking at things. The example that they give in the Kybalion is hot and cold. It can always get hotter, and it can always get colder. But when you want the temperature to feel a certain way in your house, you bring it to a specific temperature, one that is what you truly want. If you were a guest at my house and you said, it's a little cold over here, I'd probably go and read you what the temperature says and say, maybe I'll turn it up a few degrees. What are you comfortable with? I wouldn't go and max out the heat. The same is to be said about the different experiences that we have on the day-to-day journey to realizing our vision. We may polarize to one thinking pattern versus another. For example, in the earlier stages of my entrepreneurial journey, I had built my IT business through referral marketing. When I got involved with consulting and the work that I do now, everything is done online. Is one way better than another? I wouldn't say so. The answer is it depends. Depends on what you really want, and you find it within yourself. See, when I started the journey, there were those that were saying, you absolutely have to be involved with advertising. And although I was dabbling with some of those things, I actually found that it was far more effective for me to focus on referrals. So I'd build a relationship with accountants and those that had access to businesses that would become my clients. And I found that there was no limit to how far I could take my business. I actually decided in 2013 I didn't want to do it anymore because I lost interest. I no longer was interested in technology to that degree of making a career out of it as I did when I had my business in the 10 years I did in corporate prior to that. So now when I have conversations with clients in regards to marketing, they say, what's a better way of doing things? And I'll say, well, the answer is it depends. And we get into a dialogue, and there's a few things that I like to do. As I say, I believe that we all know within ourselves. Everything is and isn't at the same time. I'm not saying one way is better than another. Some might say referral marketing is better. Some might say online advertising is better. Some might say social media is better from the perspective of organic traffic and not running ads. Let's release from perhaps some absolutist perspectives or our interpretation in which we're forming absolutist conclusions, more specifically within ourselves. And let's check in with ourselves. What is really resonant with us? For me, I love connecting with people. And it was exciting for me to go out and meet people, connect with people. And then, after a period of doing that, I realized that I wanted to do it more, you could say, remotely or from home. Preference in the matter. But the truth is that I genuinely enjoyed doing that back then, and I genuinely enjoy doing what I'm doing right now. So that holds one of the keys. What do we really want to do? How do we really want to live? Now, I'm giving some entrepreneurial expressions or examples, but it's important to look at whatever goal or vision that you have and say, although I've heard that one way of doing things is better than another, I have the ability to go within myself and find what is best for me. This is also how we build a relationship with our intuition. This is also how we develop a higher degree of self-confidence, self-esteem. And you'll find that this relationship that you have with yourself, essentially becoming your own best friend, will continue to build, and you'll be able to look beyond five sensory interpretation and find the true and accurate way of doing things. Now, if you're an artist, and I believe we're all artists, this will be especially inspiring for you because you really want to live how you want to live. You want to express the way you want to express. And if you ever decided to take your art and turn it into a career or a business, I would encourage you to find your own ways of marketing and selling. I've worked with many artists, many entrepreneurs, and this is the typical conversation we have. I was told that I have to do it a certain way. And I said, well, everything is and isn't at the same time. It may have been strongly suggested that way, but you are the only interpreter of your reality. And what you want, if you want to live from the divine center, as we spoke about in last Thursday's video, is find the way that works for you. And this is not just true for entrepreneurship and business, but relationships, family, any area of your life. And I always aim on this channel to encourage it broad spectrum. I apply this to all areas of my life. Any information that I experience or receive or I come across that seems to suggest one way of doing things versus another, and even implying that one way is better than another, I check in with myself. I ask myself, is this true for me? It may be true for them. Is this resonant with who I really am? Because if you're like me, then you want to be how you really genuinely want to be. Now, in the Kybalion, they state the Hermetic teachings are to the effect that the difference between things seemingly diametrically opposed to each other is merely a matter of degree. It teaches that the pairs of opposites may be reconciled. So we want to let go of one way of doing things versus another is better. Let go of that. It could result in too much overthinking. We want to connect to what is true and resonant for us, which is why I recommend making flow a priority, because as we discussed in the video last week, that anandamide actually stimulates lateral thinking, and anandamide, the neurotransmitter, is released while you're in flow. So a lot of my best decisions have been a result of if I receive too many seemingly conflicting ideas. That's it. Seemingly conflicting. The conflict is in my own mind. I simply brought myself into a state of flow by going for a walk or focusing on one task at a time till completion, or being very present to the conversation that I'm having with the person in front of me, or really enjoying the food that I'm eating. Then all of a sudden, a hunch, an idea, a distinct perspective would show up, could flash in my mind's eye, or it could show up as an inner voice conversation. And then I know what to do. And it might not be one way or another. It could be a combination of varying degree. That's what I refer to when I say all throughout my videos, fluidity of mind. Mind is a beautiful thing. And we were given two gifts, speech and mind. And speech can be looked at as imagination, or what we say when we talk to ourselves, our internal dialogue. And when we're having an internal dialogue of identification with a certain perspective, and that perspective doesn't feel right, it feels restrictive, we could go into a state of mind in which we experience reality from that state of mind, a restrictive state of mind. And by changing the internal speech, such as, everything is and isn't at the same time, perhaps what is being suggested is one way of doing things, but I know within myself I can find the way that is true to me. And if I haven't done this as much in my past, I can develop this ability, knowing that this is one of the key ways of developing a high level of self-esteem, self-confidence, and a deeper appreciation for the inherent abilities that I have within myself. I know not only that I'm going to get to the destination, but I'm going to do it my way. I trust, and I've had this experience with myself, and I continue to encourage it every day. And I always aim to encourage this in every single conversation I have. It's one of my favorite things to encourage, is to inspire others to recognize that not only do they know what they want, but they know the way to get there. And although they may have identified with certain perspectives based on suggestion, they can depolarize themselves to those perspectives and polarize themselves. And watch the video I did on the Kybalion, principle of polarity. To the perspective, the nuanced variation between two seeming opposite poles, seemingly opposite, they are one. To the specific degree or the variation of the technique, the strategy, the way of doing things that is in harmony and in contribution to the vision. They could do even a combination. Perhaps a person might not do all referrals, and 20% they focus on referrals, 80% they focus on social media. And even social media can generate referrals. And so things aren't necessarily one way or another, but could be a harmonious, interdependent combination. Because if someone says, is referrals better than paid advertising? I would say, well, let's combine the two for fun. What if you ran some paid advertising and you acquired some clients, and then you aim to get referrals from those clients? Or what if you focused on referrals and learned how the entire buying cycle works for your specific business and translate that over to a paid advertising campaign? What about live events? Is that better? Well, the answer is it depends. Do you want to do live events? Is that something you genuinely want to do? Certainly, you can force yourself to do it if you want to, but I would assure you that there is something, and probably a bunch of things, that you could do that are your ways of doing things. I've met many artists who do things differently and encourage what I'm suggesting here. This is not something I invented. This is something that we all do. I'm aiming to encourage this fluidity of mind more so, and upcoming in our conversations, we shall do it further. Some artists have worked with consignment. Some artists have worked with restaurants in which they've placed their art on the walls and have sold their art over to those that were guests at the restaurant. Some artists ran shows. Some artists have partnered up with businesses to feature their art in creative ways, thus generating clients. Some artists have featured their art in various galleries and then end up getting opportunities for other initiatives to present their art, which might not be directly related to selling their art pieces, but they end up getting gigs which open up doors, which end up bringing them to the awareness of certain people that feature them, and it goes on in combination and permutation. That's one of the benefits of encouraging the fluidity of mind. So in practice, I suggest a person to observe where they are biasing and perhaps forming a conclusion that there's only one way to do things, only a few ways to do things. And just simply encourage through the autosuggestion. Everything is and isn't at the same time. There are many ways of doing things. And I will find a varying way that works well for me. You know, at the end of these videos, when I share the autosuggestion, they might be different from other affirmations and autosuggestions, but I find that this is the specific way that I communicate and build a relationship with my subconscious, by communicating a certain way. And if you're a student of my subconscious mind program, you know that I talk about building a relationship with the unconscious or subconscious aspects of yourself, to bring conscious awareness on all the things that we talk about, so that you know how to communicate with yourself in a very distinct way that actually impresses the subconscious mind to a higher degree than the five sensory experience would do it in imagination. I discussed this in Sunday's video. I'll put a link in the description to this. All of this self-discovery are the discoveries that I found in my journey, and I certainly would like to further encourage it with you, has been a result of letting go of suggestion or interpretation to suggestion from the five sensory experience and finding the true and accurate, we could say, sixth sense intuitive suggestion from the world within. And so I released a while back a video, I'll put a link in the description to it, based on William Walker Atkinson's book. I titled it The Art of Suggestion, in which he brings up 5 different ways in which we receive suggestion. And what we want to encourage is self-suggestion, autosuggestion. Because when we encourage the suggestion from within, it expresses outside. Now, Napoleon Hill says it in an interesting way. He's got 2 ways of looking at imagination. He says creative imagination and synthetic imagination. Creative imagination is going into the world within and finding distinct, unique perspectives that may not have been discovered, working with the power of sixth sense and intuition, and expressing from the identification of those perspectives. Or synthetic imagination, which may be connecting different ideas of how people do things, maybe some of the ideas that I've suggested, or throughout your studies, whatever it is that you're studying, you find different perspectives, people communicating about things differently, and combining it in a creative way to produce something. What we're aiming to do, and what I want to encourage, is more so of the creative imagination. I would like you to, and I've been encouraging with myself, a greater ability to go beyond the 5 sensory interpretations. Understand that this outer world is an expression of the world within, and to the degree that you are able to be vivid and detailed and specific, even if it has never been done before, and you remain faithful to that vision in your imagination, that shall impress the subconscious mind to express in ways that you might not know. Internal suggestion. So where do we get our suggestions from? Well, many of us get our suggestions as a result of perhaps excessive external locus of control, when what we're aiming to do is receive, the key word is receive, internally, the true and accurate suggestions that are in harmony and in contribution to your visions. So let's look at this right here, the 5 ways of suggestion. Suggestion of authority. Suggestion by authority manifests both in the positive authoritative statements directed to the point, and also by the spoken or written statements made by those who speak or write them with an air of authority. So even if a person speaks with a lot of authority, I would like you to still develop the ability within yourself to go beyond what they're suggesting, to really check in with yourself and say, which element, part or in whole, you don't have to accept all of it. If it resonates with you, then fine. Which part of this can be integrated? Which part of this can be integrated perhaps with a different slant, a different angle? Which part of this can be adjusted in a certain way where I could apply it in a different way that is being suggested, and then that is what's true for me? The suggestion of association. He says, it's very easy for us to associate certain things with certain other things, and we will find that when one of the things is recalled, it will bring with it its associated impressions. One of the best ways to work with this is to make peace with words. So if I say the word money to one person, they may feel excited and stimulated to come up with different ways of bringing forth prosperity while also benefiting the lives of others, fair value exchange. Or another person, if I say money to them, it might bring up certain restrictive thinking patterns, which will throw them into a state of mind in which they feel limited or disempowered. Now, because we come across words all day long and phrases and communication, especially if we are consuming information or we are having conversations with others, it is beneficial then to make peace with certain words that are brought up, in which, for whatever the reason may be, we have created some associations within ourselves in which we don't feel inspired by the words, but rather feel overwhelmed, stressed out, frustrated, reactive to the words. The suggestion of habit. He says the suggestion of habit may arise from an original cause of suggestion of authority, suggestion of association, suggestion of repetition, suggestion of imitation, or else from an original decision of the intellect resulting from correct reasoning. The former act or thought acts as a suggestive outside influence, although it belongs to one's own mentality. So this is habitual thinking. So if our habitual thinking is to perhaps identify with rigid perspectives and we feel reactivity intense and limited, maybe we need to reflect upon and meditate upon the quote, everything is and isn't at the same time, and realize that the answer is it depends. And there are many ways of doing things, and we can find a nuanced variation, nuanced perspective, or a certain slant in part or in whole in combination of what is being proposed from different books, information, people, teachers, mentors, which stimulate perhaps a synthetic imagination, or we can go within ourselves and say, what's true and in harmony for us, really? And find the true and accurate perspective within ourselves and identify with that influence from within and form habitual thinking based on that perspective. Now, the habitual thinking based on that perspective is really about honoring your intuition and living from intuition every day till it becomes a habit of honoring your intuition. Then you'll find yourself being very creative and expressive in your creativity. You'll notice that. We got the suggestion of repetition. Suggestion of habit has its power imparted to it by the habitual repetition of an act or thought on the part of the individual, while suggestion of repetition gains its power by the repetition of a suggestion from outside object or person. It is the constant dripping of water wearing away the stone, which is why I always suggest consuming information and even encouraging the information in your world within, which is your internal dialogue, from the perspective of repetition of the same information that is in harmony and in contribution to your vision, and repetition of the same information from different perspectives that say the same thing that is in harmony and in contribution to your vision. So if it's intuition and fluidity of mind that you would like to encourage, and everything is and isn't at the same time, seeing things from many different perspectives, then I would suggest consuming and encouraging yourself with information, both from what you read and study, as well as the world within, which we would call open-minded and inspiring conversation. Now, this can be done in a mastermind in which you connect with people that actually allow through the conversation. I've got some friends that I have these conversations with. It's a very beautiful thing, in which if they observe that I'm getting too rigid on a perspective, they'll not shame me, but rather say, here's another way of looking at it. Would this be helpful? And I would do the same for them as well. So this is not to shame, this is not to condemn, this is not to say one way is better than another, but it's rather a practice of having open-minded, interdependent conversation that allows us to release from unnecessary absolutist perspectives, which actually allows us to become more lighthearted. And what you'll find is through the practice of doing this is if you encounter a challenge, a perceived obstacle, you'll be able to see it differently. Instantaneously, you'll find you'll be able to switch perspective. You might not even say to yourself, everything isn't at the same time. You'll just be able to see it from many different perspectives and choose the true and accurate perspective. And you'll be able to transmute an obstacle into an opportunity energetically. You know, the transmutation is an energetic thing. And it is stimulated by mental states. And so we'll say, oh, this is an opportunity for me to practice fluidity of mind. If I find myself being rigid to this is how I deal with it, or that's the way I deal with it, and because of that I feel trapped by the only 2 or 3 or 4 ways that I have discovered currently to deal with it, I recognize that there are infinity ways to deal with it, and I will find that within myself. We want to encourage this kind of thinking if we would like to work with the suggestion of repetition to stimulate fluidity of mind. The suggestion of imitation. It says, in the acceptance of suggestion of authority, there is to be found an unconscious imitation of the mental attitude of the person asserting the authority. And in suggestion of repetition, there is to be found evidence of imitation. Examples are found in schools of philosophy, theories, thought, and religion. Now, this is very important. And so certain schools of thought seem to encourage rigid absolutist perspectives, which I see many individuals who have a high degree of anxiety, overthinking. And I can track it over to rigid perspectives, dogmatic ways of thinking, absolutist perspectives. So I trust this video has been helpful and beneficial to you. I want to further encourage these discussions. And really the premise of this is I have faith that you know, because I've seen this with everybody I've connected with. I can legitimately say everybody. That each person, beyond the layers of perhaps programming based on suggestion that they have identified with, genuinely knows what they want in life and wants to experience. And they also know their way to get there. And although they might not know all the steps to get there, what I find is just through dialogue and conversation and releasing from rigid absolutist perspectives, they're able to find the first step or the next phase. And all they do is commit to it and see it all the way to completion. And they automatically bring forth that lateral thinking. because we can relate it again to last week's video, that anandamide is released, which also stimulates the lateral thinking, which is the harmonization of the convergent and divergent thinking. If a person gets too rigid, they might bias over to one way or another. And we have the ability to practice what's being discussed here, release from that rigid thinking. So a practical way of doing all this is to observe tension and reactivity in regards to rigid thinking, and simply say to yourself, everything is and isn't at the same time. This is one way of looking at things, and there are many ways, many degrees, and I can depolarize myself from this thinking pattern in relation to this reactivity-based state of mind and bring myself more into a flow-based, fluid state of mind to reveal the accurate and true perspective. And then you'll get the hunch, the idea, and inspiration that will reveal the way forward. You can find the answers within yourself, and I believe that encouraging fluidity of mind, or this idea, everything is and isn't at the same time, releases us from mental bias-based rigidity and brings us more into that fluidity of mind. Then we can identify and live from the true perspectives that are in harmony and in contribution to the vision. So let's go ahead and conclude this with an affirmation to further encourage the internal discovery of the true suggestions and expression of it. We could say, I recognize that the authority is within. I'm able to observe the inner dialogue, inner conversation of love and true prosperity in relation to my vision, and associate to those perspectives and allow myself to express, thus then forming the habit through the repetition. And through the process of repetition, I recognize that I'm able to look beyond interpretations of the five sensory experience that may suggest, then find the true of the various perspectives to identify with it, guided from within, and express accordingly, discovering my distinct philosophies, theories, thought processes that are individualized as I automatically express in my communication, in my artistic expression, and in my innovation for others to also do the same.